This is astronaut Neil Armstrong, command pilot for the Apollo 11 moon landing mission. Columbus explored one new world. How do you feel about such comparisons?
First, he wasn't sure where he was going. At least he thought he was going to China or the Indies, and ended up, of course, in a completely new world. Now, I very much hope that we won't terminate at some place that we didn't expect to, some planet that we hadn't planned to visit.
We're going to the moon because it's in the nature of the human being to face challenges. It's by the nature of his deep inner soul. We're required to do these things, just as salmon swim upstream.
Say that fear is an unknown emotion to us. The work that goes into the preparation for flight does everything it can toward erasing those kinds of possibilities. And I would say that as a crew, among the three of us, really have no fear of launching out on this expedition.
The night before he went to the Cape, he said, I just want you to know that, we're confident we're coming back. But yeah, there is some risk in this mission. And he just sort of stated it, not dramatically at all, because that wasn't how he was. So, okay, Dad. See you when you get back.
At 6 years old, I was sheltered from a lot of the dangers, a lot of the risks, a lot of the worries. My mom carried them all, and she carried them in a way that I did not know that she had them.
We did not know that Apollo 11 would make it to the moon. We only knew that that was an attempt. Everything had to work. And it just wasn't likely that everything was going to work out fine, that there wouldn't be a glitch somewhere along the line.
Looking back, we were really very privileged to have lived in that thin slice of history, where we changed how man looks at himself and what he might become.
There it sits out there, the culmination of somewhere between 25 and $33 billion, the skills and dedication of about 300,000 technicians, the solemn but certainly risk-filled pledge of a president, some heartbreaking failures and some stirring successes.
This is Apollo Saturn Launch Control. We passed the 6-minute mark in our countdown for Apollo 11, the flight to land of the first men on the moon. And all is still go as we monitor our status for it.
I remember getting onto a little boat, and we watched the launch from there. My guess is that this was in case something went wrong.
T-3, we are go with all elements of the mission at this time. Firing command coming in now. We are on the automatic sequence. We're still go on Apollo 11 at this time.
I didn't know it was Neil until they named him on TV, and I said, I know him well. I didn't know he would progress this far. But here he was in command of the moon landing. Hard to believe. But if it was anybody, it was going to be Armstrong.
Neil Armstrong from Wapakoneta, Ohio. He's got to be the guy.
When did you last talk to your son?
Yesterday, about noon, we had a nice long talk with him on various subjects, mostly pertaining to the family. The rest of the family is, of course, at the Cape.
You go the way you expect.
Well, Chet, with all of our technology, we're having difficulty getting pictures from Wapakoneta, Ohio.
We're at my grandparents' home, Wapakoneta, Ohio. Neil was born in this house in the living room, August 5th, 1930. Couldn't have been better.
Growing up in a small Midwestern town with parents of German descent gave my father very strong values. That's where he came from. Those were his roots. You work hard, keep your nose clean. Really that kind of simple.
This is a picture with Dean 1.5. I'm 18 months older and Neil is 3 years older. We called each other Neil the Peel, Dean the Bean, June the Prune.
The experts give 10 to 1. She can't fly.
Neil was sort of off in his own world.
Georgie's set on taking a chance, and there he goes.
We often found him in the corner reading his books. We liked to tease him, but he accepted it with a big smile.
And that's the time the experts got fooled. Good boy, George.
He was interested in airplanes from the time he was a little boy. His mother bought him a 20-cent airplane, and he built that. Then from the 20-cent, he went to a 50-center and went on up. Pretty soon he was building with motors and flying them and testing them.
I knew what I wanted to be when I grew up. I wanted to be an airplane designer. I wanted to spend my life in aviation.
He got his pilot's license before he got his driver's license. It was more important to him to be able to fly than to be able to drive.
The first time you solo any airplane is a special day. The first time ever you solo is an exceptionally special day. There was a great deal of excitement in my mind when I got to do that first flight.
He had turned 17 in August. He went to college. He was doing a Navy scholarship.
I couldn't have been happier with what I was doing. Going into engineering, 2 years of study, then into the Navy, flight training, and then 3 years of active duty.
A highly trained and well-equipped North Korean army swarmed across the 38th parallel to attack unprepared South Korean defenders. Caught off guard, they were all but overwhelmed until the United Nations took its historic vote to intervene.
I got my wings in August of 1950, so I was then assigned to a jet fighter squadron. We immediately prepared for the Korean action. I was very young, very green.
Neil was just another name on a list when he came to the squadron. He was quiet and poised and very confident.
He was unusually quiet, I would say, reserved to himself. Nobody was concerned about him at all. We knew he was a good aviator. Good aviator. At that time, we were flying the F-9, F-2, the Panther.
Very honest airplane. Do everything you wanted it to do except climb.
Our job was to support our ground forces, in our case, mostly Marines.
We learned flak suppression and how to knock down the bridges and the railroads. You understand that there's going to be casualties when you go, so you've probably made most of that adjustment in your mind ahead of time.
Many younger people are uncomfortable with the idea of death. I shared that uneasiness. Dear folks, we had a terrible accident aboard our ship. 4 were killed and 5 missing. Approximately 15 others were badly burned. I knew well 4 of the 9 dead and 5 of the injured. It was a tragedy. It took me a long time to get over it.
I won't say we weren't scared, because we were. But your training takes over. That gets you through the sticky parts.
Dear folks, there's a lot of war to go yet. Last Monday, September 3rd, while on an armed reconnaissance, I was hit by enemy anti-aircraft fire. I was diving on a target at the time and narrowly averted hitting the ground, but hit some electric lines, shaving off about 5 feet of starboard wing. I was able to nurse the aircraft back across the friendly territory where I bailed out. No other news right now. Same old Neil.
He was just one of the boys until that incident. And when we started evaluating his decision-making and his skill in flying that airplane to where he did, that made him kind of head and shoulders above the rest.
I value those experiences very highly because you build a lot of character and you build a lot of backbone. And you're a better person for having learned to endure that situation and those risks.
T-minus 1 minute and counting. We passed T-minus 60. $55 seconds and counting. Neil Armstrong reported back when he received the good wishes. Thank you very much. We know it will be a good flight. Good luck and Godspeed. T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence start.
Saturn V launch is just so sensory overload. No video system or audio system that I've ever heard captures the way that really sounds. Sort of the cracking of the exhaust going up.
It's almost like you're just being shaken, but you're not moving, right? It's a very odd thing, but it's incredibly powerful, and something that I will never forget.
The Saturn V was a 3,000-ton machine with an energy more than that to lift you off the pad. It felt like a train on a bad railroad track, shaking in every direction. And it was loud, really loud. It was an honest-to-God, go-to-the-moon machine.
The thing that I remember is the exhaust obscured the initial movement of the rocket. You're like, okay, where is it? I didn't perhaps realize how slow that Saturn V, sort of lumbers off the pad. Finally, we could start to see the top of the rocket peer up above the clouds. It was like, okay, good.
This is the beginning of the most audacious undertaking that man has ever attempted. We'll be back in just a moment.
Earth angel, will you be mine?
My time in Korea expired, and I thought it was important to go back and finish my education. When I went back to university, the kids looked so young.
I met him at Purdue. He was a freshman.
Earth angel, the one I adore.
He didn't like to talk about much. And he never did talk about much. But what he did say seemed to be meaningful.
I fell for you.
I just thought he was honest, very good looking, very funny. After that evening, he went home and told somebody that I was the one he was going to marry. But he never asked me out until he got out of school. And he came up to visit me on his way to Edwards.
Edwards Air Force Base in the Mojave Desert in California. This is where test flights of all high-speed research aircraft have taken place.
Being assigned to Edwards Air Force Base was, I think, the goal of every pilot, and certainly anyone who thought about ever being a test pilot.
This was one of the most exciting places to work in the world at that time. Dozens and dozens of new concepts, configurations, and tests. Something new to talk about every day.
At Edwards, more and more technology was being introduced. So there was this crossover between flying an airplane manually, the old stick and rudder days, and managing a sophisticated system in the air. So it was a challenging period.
It was a dangerous business. Everybody knew it. And those of us that survived, I don't think dwelt much on the failures, on the deaths.
We were married in 1956, January 1956. After that, we went up to the desert. Bought a house up there. It was a cabin that we bought. A cabin that only had a fireplace for heat. Neil was trying to work on that and improve it.
And they had Ricky. He was a good kid. He still is.
Come on, baby, let the good time roll. Come on, baby, let me thrill your soul.
We moved when I was 5. So I do remember it, although I tend to remember just like little snippets or almost like still pictures of it rather than longer scenes.
Come on, baby, let the good time roll. Roll all night long.
I remember walking on a path to a neighbor's house and a big rattlesnake went right across. And I just kind of jumped over it and kept going.
Rock me all night long. Come on, baby, let the good time roll.
When Karen was born, she's the sweetest thing in the whole wide world.
Come on, baby, let the good time roll.
He called her Muffy right away. He absolutely loved that girl, and he paid all of his attention to her, like there was nobody else.
Karen was a precious thing, and she was Rick's best friend. In order to keep track of the children, I would put cowbells on their back and tie them so that when they walked, they would clank, and that way I could hear them above the roaring wind.
Rock me all night long. Come on, baby, let the good time roll.
What a life that was. They were both very happy. Those times, those were good times.
Roll all night long.
Moscow newspapers were first. Then headlines around the world echoed the news. Russia had blasted a man-made moon into outer space. On every continent and in every land, the story of Sputnik 1 dominated the front pages.
When Sputnik, the Russian satellite, orbited the Earth, it was a shocking moment for the world, I suppose, but certainly for the United States.
Can you drop the atomic bomb from a satellite? What can they do from that thing that we can't do now because we don't have any space vehicles? That's where it started.
Stop!
On April 12, 1961, Yuri Alexeyevich Gagarin flew once around the world in 89 minutes. On April 14th, President Kennedy called NASA into the White House. Is there any place we can catch them? What can we do? Can we put a man on the moon before them?
At Edwards in the early 60s, there was a transition into spaceflight. And Neil was on the forefront of that. Neil flew the X-15. Everybody admired everybody who flew the X-15. That was one of the ultimate goals. If you could get in that program, that was the best, right?
The X-15 was a little airplane powered by a big rocket. Dropped from the wing of a B-52 bomber, its rocket would burn for a minute and a half, accelerate to about Mach 6, coast up to 60 miles altitude, then glide to a landing.
Took you high enough, we were flying into space, and more importantly, we were learning how to fly back into the atmosphere.
I'm not sure who was the best pilot of the X-15. There were 7, 8 of them. They were all very good. But Neil, I think, had a better concept of how and why the machine was put together and how it should be tested.
And therein, I think, is an area that Neil filled a very unique slot. Neil was a hell of an engineer. A pretty good pilot, too.
Release.
This particular flight, we went to somewhat above 200,000 feet.
Looks pretty good. 250.
In the process, I got the nose up above the horizon. I tried to push down, but discovered I had no aerodynamic controls. It was actually skipping outside the atmosphere. It wasn't going down, as there was no air to bite into.
Just like being on a very fast horse and riding it at full speed. You've got to be looking out way ahead where the fences are, where the rocks are, and start to avoid them early. You can't wait till the last minute and then jerk on the range.
I just had to wait until I got enough air to have aerodynamic control and some lift on the wings. And immediately started to make a turn back.
Neil could do things like that. His credentials of performing under stress were clearly there.
That was Neil. Did a magnificent job. But I've got to say that he was not the type of person who would run out and say, look at me, I'm Neil Armstrong. Neil was the kind of person you just wanted to like.
When Neil was still working at Edwards, Karen developed a tumor in her brain under the age of 3.
I knew something was wrong with her because she had balance troubles, and I think I told my mom, yeah, she's having a hard time walking again. But I couldn't put that together with the disease.
The tumor grew very, very fast. We tried radiation.
All through her radiation, she smiled and never complained once. Never, never, never once. She was a gift to both of them.
She died on their wedding anniversary.
Neil missed her dearly. Oh.
I thought the best thing for me to do in that situation was to continue with my work. Keep things as normal as I could. And try as hard as I could not to have it affect my ability to do useful things. I was doing the best I could.
After Karen died, I was ready to go anywhere. I thought a change would be good.
There was this project down in Houston, the Apollo program. They didn't really know what to test for exactly, so they did everything. They didn't miss anything as far as I knew. They did every test known to man.
Neil finally decided that he would try for this program, and he got accepted. When we moved to Houston, I was pregnant with Mark.
Mark was born. Yippee, Mark! He's so totally different from Rick, you know. They're two opposites.
The neighborhood in Houston, there wasn't much of a neighborhood. It was all trees. It hadn't even been made into a street yet.
Ed White and I bought some property together and split it. I built my house on one half of it, and he built his house on the other. We were good friends, neighbors.
All the people in the neighborhood had someone that worked for NASA in one respect or another. That whole community was very self-supporting. Everyone was in it together.
How I would characterize Neil, he was quiet, introspective, much more interested in the details of things than I ever was. You know, you look at a watch, Neil wants to know how it runs, and I want to know what time it said.
Neil lived in a shell, and in order to get Neil out of his shell, you had to introduce a subject that he was interested in, and you had to convince him that you knew something about that subject. And if you passed that test, and he'd pop out of his shell, big smile on his face, and be your best buddy.
He listened a lot. And when he spoke, he didn't use a lot of words, but it was very clear that he had thought through something and had come to a conclusion.
I was so pleased to be associated with the program. The goals, I thought, were important to society in general, and I would have been happy doing anything they asked me to do.
Before men ever stand on the moon, many technical hurdles must be overcome. The steps remaining parallel the steps undertaken in the development of aviation. Project Mercury put us through the Kitty Hawk stage in space. Our second step, Project Gemini.
I'd been Capcom on Gemini 5. They just splashed down. My boss came up and said, I'd like you to start working with Neil as Prime on Gemini 8. I thought, really? Really? He said, he's waiting for you in his office. Go see him. So I went over, and there was Neil, big smile, big, as he always had, you know. Okay. He said, here we go. Let me tell you what we're going to do.
We were in a race, and it was very evident to us all the time. You wanted not to be diverting your attention in any way to things you really didn't need to worry about. You could stand across the street, and you could not tell when quitting time was. People didn't leave at quitting time. 14 hours a day, 6.5 days a week. It was just insane.
Dad was training a lot. He was not home very often. My mother was very much of an unsung hero. And Dad, not being, you know, the most verbose person he ever met, had been guilty of not being very communicative. So she wasn't always well informed about where Dad was going, what he was doing. That just left Mom to figure things out on her own. And I think she did that. She did it very, very well. And she did it without complaint.
The objective of Gemini 8 was to rendezvous and dock with the first target vehicle anybody would have, the Agena, for the first time. People didn't know whether rendezvous would work or not. Once we got docked, I would do an EVA. I was going to walk around the world. I had a 90-minute EVA. And then a controlled reentry. So it was our job to put all these pieces together in a full spectrum of spaceflight.
We had a squawk box in the house installed for the mission so you could hear mission control communications all the time rather than just what might be on TV.
Stage 2 pre-valves coming open, 5 seconds. T-minus 20 seconds, mark. Five, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ignition. Roger, clock start. Fuel pressure running a little high.
Roger.
Roger.
Stand. How's it looking, guidance?
It's looking good, flight.
Roger.
The launch was great. The second stage was hauling the mail, and then going through the rendezvous, seeing the Agena, just actually spectacular view.
That's beautiful. Man, that's great. Way to go, partner. You done it, boy. You done it. Good job. Do the thing. Okay, Jiminy 8, you're looking good on the ground. Go ahead and dock.
Neil did the docking smooth as you would expect.
Flight, we are down.
Shortly after, I looked over and saw Neil's 8-ball, the attitude horizon, was in a 30-degree bank. There was no horizon out the window. I said, Neil, we're in a bank. And he looked down and said, we are in a bank.
On a flight, CSQ.
Go ahead.
The Agena is tumbling violently at this time. Gemini 8, CSQ, Capcom, contact, how do you read? We got serious problems here with it, so we're tumbling end over end. Okay.
Neil says, turn the Agena off, which I did. He turned on the Gemini, and then everything stabilized for about 4 or 5 minutes. And then it started to turn, started to roll again.
When the rates became quite violent, it was a bit dicey. You see, Murphy's Law says bad things happen at the worst possible time. And in this case, we were out of radio contact.
We got down to about 13% propellant and decided we have to get off of the Agena. I hit the undock switch. And when we pulled off the Agena, we found out the problem was not the Agena, it was a Gemini. And then we started a very rapid roll rate.
Okay, fine, keep at it. After checking the space train system,
Things were just awful. They were spinning at maybe a revolution per second. And there was a very strong concern that they would black out. And that would be it. It would be over.
I wonder if there's any chance that something like that happened. I don't know.
At that point, Mission Control turned the squawk box off.
We're trying to check all that out now. We're trying to get some...
Mission Control did not know what was happening, and they didn't want to expose a tragedy without being able to manage the situation. That was something that my mother was not happy about.
She wasn't happy about that, and she went over to Mission Control to find out what was going on.
And I was refused entry.
I would not have wanted to been the one to tell her that she couldn't come in. That wouldn't have gone well for them.
We got down to no other options, and Neil finally said, we got to activate the RCS. Now, The RCS was a small re-entry control system in the nose of the spacecraft.
Once you activate that system, that's your last gasp. If you lose it, you can't get back into the atmosphere. He probably deduced it, this is all I can do, is try this and see if it'll work.
He had to reach up to an overhead panel to get a hold of switches. That's amazing physiologically that in this high-speed roll, he could turn his head up and get the right switches, which he did, and he stopped the roll.
We do have the spacecraft under control at the present time. We're in slowly drifting flight.
At that time, they could see on telemetry that he had activated the re-entry control system. So almost immediately, we knew we were going to have to get them down quickly.
Okay, you sending all of that in ASAP?
Affirmative.
Okay, let's expedite. Capcom Houston flight, we are primed for air to ground.
Roger, go.
We took great pride in landing close to the aircraft carrier that was awaiting us. My carrier was located in the Caribbean. I landed near Okinawa. That's the furthest anyone's ever missed. I don't expect that record to be broken.
Some of the people were second-guessing Neil about his performance. I never did. I thought he did a good job. You know, there's a lot of that among very competitive people.
Neil's action, I think, saved the mission. It upped my view of Neil at that point. You knew he had the right stuff.
Stayed calm, didn't get excited. That's what we were looking for in the first place for using test pilots. A guy that was used to putting his life on the line every time he flew.
There are a lot of people here. Most of them seem to be my family. You're my people, and I'm proud to be one of you.
They could have lost their life. There's no point in talking about it. They either do or you don't. It's the way it is, you know?
The spacecraft you're going to ride on is, to a certain extent, untried. You approach it with any apprehension as compared to the Gemini, which had been flown before?
There's a great deal of pride involved in making a first flight. So I think I'm looking forward to the flight with a great deal of anticipation.
It was all over in one stunned, horrifying second. At T-minus 10 minutes in a simulated countdown, an electrical spark apparently shot out and ignited the 100% oxygen in the cabin. Horrified engineers watched the burst of flames and smoke envelop Grissom, White, and Chaffee. They heard their last words of shock and surprise. The crewmen never had a chance.
It was terrible. I could hear his voice in that thing. I could hear all three of them. It didn't last very long either. It only lasted about 10 or 15 seconds.
It was a very depressing sight. Everything was burned and gray and melted. It was a disaster.
The management were running to get to the moon. And I think they were willing to take some chances. And I think that had they been thinking properly, they wouldn't have taken them.
Some very traumatic times. I suppose you're much more likely to accept the loss of a friend in flight, but it really hurt to lose them in a ground test. That was an indictment of ourselves.
There was never any commotion about it like there would be today. So you mourn but briefly, and then you get on with the job.
It took the fire to rebuild the vehicle. And I think that was the secret to Apollo. Without it, just wouldn't have happened. I don't think we'd have gotten to the moon.
The Apollo missions came close enough together that we were in this constant one more step, one more step. Then, when 11 came along, it all seemed different. You know, this time we were really gonna go land.
There were 30 people vying to be the first man on the moon.
I think they could have all done the job. No question in my mind about it.
It was Dick Slayton who was responsible for crew scheduling, had developed a program where if you were back up for one flight, then 3 flights later you became the prime.
They all say there was a rotation method in it. Boy, if it was a hard one to understand.
One seat. And in it was a fellow named Neil Armstrong. Now, why was that? What were the reasons that he was the one and the others were rejected? If you take the short view, it is that he was probably the best qualified. He'd been a combat pilot during Korea. He'd proved his mettle there. He was flying the X-15, and that put him above and beyond all the rest of the candidates. If you want to take a longer view, then you want to consider, what was he going to be like after the flight? That was equally important. He wasn't going to go out and drink too much, make a fool of himself. He was a straight arrow. A lot of people criticized Neil because he didn't, quote, get out and sell the program. But I think he was much more effective in his quiet way.
Did I have anything to do with Neil being the first man on the moon? Yes, I did it. Deke Slayton said Aldrin's going to be the first guy on the moon. Up here says we don't want Aldrin the first guy on the moon. I just felt like Buzz was not the right personality and would not be the best representative for the United States. I thought Neil would do better. I didn't dislike Aldrin. Didn't like him either. We all have weaknesses. I haven't met that guy yet. I didn't know Jesus.
We were a congenial bunch, but really focused on the job. Buzz and I had both flown in Korea, and his flying skills, I was sure, were good. His intelligence was high. He was a creative thinker, and he was willing to make suggestions. I'm not sure I recognized at that point in time what might be considered eccentricities. Mike Collins was a joy to work with, able, cheerful, and relaxed. He'd be the sole occupant of the command module whilst we descended to the moon's surface.
We were working night and day. We felt the whole weight of the world on our shoulders. Everybody was looking at us.
There were some things that were done specifically for the benefit of giving the press the opportunity to either talk with us or take pictures of our activities in preparation. We probably resented that to some extent.
How would you describe your attitude just before flight? Well,
I certainly wouldn't say
why don't you draw a straw?
I was asked by the bosses, "Do you think you and the guys are ready?" And I had to say, well, it would be nice to have another month. But we were in a race here, and I had to say, we're ready. We're ready to go.
This is Apollo Control at 102 hours, 12 minutes into the flight of Apollo 11. We're now 21 minutes, 23 seconds from the beginning of the powered descent to the lunar surface.
As we approached the landing, Mom woke me up, so I was a little, probably, groggy-eyed. But it was all fun and no worry from my 6-year-old point of view.
Houston Eagle, how do you read?
I was more than just a little amazed. Amazed not only because of the unlikely chain of events and quirks of fate that had put an Ohio farm boy in that remarkable position, but amazed even more because everything was working.
Eagle, Houston, if you read your go for power descent, over. Bye-bye, Eagle, we're standing by for your burn report, over. Columbia, Houston, we lost Eagle again.
They lit the engine and the wheels came off of the thing. We started having communication dropouts, landing radar problems. We were off trajectory, so we were going to land short.
Position check down range shows to be a little off. Roger, copy. And Eagle, Houston, we got data dropout.
We couldn't understand why this was happening.
Program alarm. 1202, 1202. Roger, copy.
In mission control, it got very, very quiet.
You're always concerned when any kind of alarm comes on. I didn't understand the nature of this particular alarm. The computer had a lot of complaints, but my own feeling was as long as the engine was operating right, I had control. I would be in favor of continuing, no matter what the computer was complaining about.
1202 alarm.
It's executive overflow. If it does not occur again, we're fine.
We're going that flight. We're going that alarm. 700 feet, 21 down, 33 degrees, pretty rocky area.
When Neil pitched over and he said, hey, we got a bunch of rocks out there, we can't land here, that was potentially the end if he couldn't find a place to land.
The autopilot was taking us in towards a very large crater about the size of a big football stadium, with steep slopes covered with large rocks about the size of automobiles. Not a good place to land at all. So I took over manually and flew it like a helicopter out to the west.
I just remember him saying, yeah, he's off flying it himself for some reason. And they were asking, can anybody tell us where this thing is?
He was moving across the lunar surface pretty great speed. We kept hearing the fuel call-outs, and that was grabbing all of our attention.
We knew he should be landing. We knew how much fuel we do. We were timing it on the ground. What's going through your mind is going to run out of petrol. That's what's going through your mind.
60 seconds.
He had 60 seconds to land, or we would call an abort. Then I called 30 seconds. Tension was increasing. Everybody, literally holding our breath. Are we going to make it?
Buzz said we're picking up some dust. I can remember thinking, my God, we're there. We are blowing dust off the surface of the moon.
I heard contact, and then there was a pregnant pause. It was the same old Neil, just calm as you can imagine, unflappable. I don't see how he did that so calmly, because I was shouting it out.
We copy you down, Eagle. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again.
It was just a celebration. We pulled it off. We actually did it.
We made it. The thought finally reached my consciousness. I clasped the bulky glove of Buzz Aldrin on my right. The silent handshake was the only congratulations necessary.
How did it feel at the moment of touchdown?
Oh, I was terribly excited. It's a marvelous thing that we have successfully managed to land safely on the moon.
Is Neil carrying anything for you to the moon?
Yes, but that's private.
You're not going to tell us?
Okay, Neil, we can see you coming down the ladder now.
When Neil stepped out, that's where you could really hear a pin drop. Because people were trying to listen to everything that was going on.
At the foot of the ladder, the surface appears to be very, very fine-grained as you get close to it. It's almost like a powder. I'm going to step off the limb now.
Just the thought of the first step of a human being on another heavenly body was just, to me personally, overwhelming.
Nobody knew he would say anything. I mean, there was no big plan for him to do anything. And then he came up with the right words, as usual.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
The thing that I remember about the first step was that nobody heard the first words in our living room.
That's kind of what I did. What'd you say?
Something about one small step, you know.
Man, where did he get that from? That was perfect.
I thought, well, when I step off, I'm just going to be making a little step from there down to there. But when I thought about all those 400,000 people that had given me the opportunity to make that step, I thought, it's going to be a big something for all those folks, and indeed a lot of others who weren't even involved with the project. So it was kind of a simple correlation of thoughts.
I think he said it pretty well, don't you?
It was special and memorable, but we weren't there to meditate. We were there to get things done. So we got on with it. There were a lot of proposals for what to do on the lunar surface by different people. Some people thought a UN flag should be there, and some people thought there should be flags of a lot of nations. My job was to get the flag there. I was less concerned about whether it was the right artifact to place. I let other wiser minds than mine make those kinds of decisions.
We were watching it in our living room, and the fascinating thing was how each of the three generations reacted. My wife and I, of course, were overwhelmed with the achievement. My dad was speechless. Having been born in 1893 when there were no automobiles or buggies or anything, to see this, he could hardly comprehend it. My two teenagers were sort of, yeah, I think maybe I saw this on a TV show last week.
Beautiful view. Is that something? I am nervous inside out here.
I was with the president during the landing in the White House. You know, that could have been a disaster for him. If something would have gone wrong, who would have got the blame? I tried to tell him that, and I also tried to keep him from taking too much credit because he didn't deserve either the credit or the blame.
Hello, Neil and Buzz. This certainly has to be the most historic telephone call ever made. For one priceless moment in the whole history of man, all the people on this earth are truly one.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's a great honor and privilege for us to be here representing not only the United States, but all nations and the vision for the future.
It's marvelous.
Absolutely fantastic.
This is formidable. I don't know.
Being closer to the moon makes us realize that we're all human beings together.
I hope this brings unity.
I felt the world got closer today. I felt we all got to know each other that much more.
Good thing for all people, for all the world.
Everyone they were united. They were united at that time. It was extremely exhilarating.
This is the greatest event in all the history of the human race. Today is New Year's Day of the year one.
The whole thing was one of great exhilaration and pride about what we were accomplishing, what he was accomplishing, what the country was accomplishing, what mankind was accomplishing.
The Apollo 11 was kind of like crossing the goal in a football game. The rest of our flights had helped to advance the goal, but Neil and his crew were the ones that scored.
You know what he told me? Seeing the Earth in the background was it. That's what I remember more than anything.
To stand on the surface of the moon and look at the Earth high overhead is certainly a unique experience. Although very beautiful, it is very remote, an oasis or an island. But it is the only island that we know of that is suitable for man. The importance of protecting and saving that home has never been felt more strongly. Protection is required, however, not from foreign aggressors or natural calamity, but from its own population.
What a moment. We'd all been working on it for so long, and then there it was. But in the back of our mind, we were thinking about getting them home and get them off of there.
Tranquility Base, Houston. Roger, go ahead. You're cleared for takeoff. Roger, understand. We're number one on the runway. Roger. Eagle, you're back in orbit. Heading west Tranquility Base. Roger, we copy. The whole world is proud of you.
To all those Americans who built those spacecraft and put their heart and all their abilities into those craft. To those people, tonight we give a special thank you.
It was sort of all about the team, not the individual, not what he did, but everybody.
July 24, dawn in the Pacific. Apollo blazes across the heavens, coming back to Earth at 25,000 miles an hour.
We did New York, Chicago, and LA all in one day. It was fabulous, like nothing I'd ever seen before. The streets were just jammed. I mean, there was 50, 60 people deep. Everybody was pushing and shoving and trying to get your attention.
was kind of crazy. The amount of ticker tape and stuff like filling up the car. You don't have any preparation for that experience.
This was the beginning. This is the beginning of it all. But there was nothing you could do. I mean, these people were just happy to see you.
They became immediate, more than rock stars even. They were world heroes. And all three of them were not attention seekers at that point.
How do you propose to restore some normalcy to your private lives in the years ahead?
I wish I knew the answer to the latter part of your question.
Kind of depends on you.
Neil didn't like the exposure that he saw coming. He did a real good job at it during the world tour and everything like that.
Everywhere we went, our spokesman was Neil. Poor guy had to make the speeches.
This is the beginning of a new era, when man understands the universe around him, in the beginning of the era when man understands himself.
He did what he had to do, and whenever he had to do it, he was going to do it well. But he might not like it, and so that's Neil.
Some of the activities he performed through a feeling of obligation. It was part of his job.
He's probably the best person of all of us to have been the first man on the moon because of the way he handled it. I mean, I don't know how I could ever take on that load. And the fact that he's first, everybody wants Neil Armstrong.
When are you going to take the first woman to the moon? Yeah.
We welcome you with open arms.
The amount of requests for him to come here, do this, speak, show up, write a letter of recommendation. People would write letters, Neil Armstrong, USA, and he would get them.
He's just not a man to ever
I certainly became aware of the stresses after the flight of Apollo 11, with news crews and folks essentially camped out in our front yard. At that point, you could start to see a little bit of frustration with just being able to function normally.
You start scratching your head and you say, oh, gee whiz, what do we do now?
Thank God social media didn't exist back then. At that point, we moved to Ohio.
The decision to move was very intentional, to try to simplify our lives.
He just wanted to be a regular guy, just like everybody else. And he was like that.
The media at that time labeled my father as a recluse. And It's just nothing could be further from the truth.
He got a bad rap from the press. He just didn't like that publicity.
He wasn't comfortable taking credit for something that belonged to so many people.
I just don't deserve celebrity. I wasn't chosen to be first. I was just chosen to command that flight. Circumstance put me in that particular role. That wasn't planned by anyone.
Everybody is pretty numb about space by now, and I think nobody cares at all. These space shots have been too exclusively scientific in their orientation, and I think the average man in America just feels that space is just a great waste of money because he doesn't feel any part of it.
5 years later, Armstrong, Aldrin, and Collins are out of the space program and very different men. Mike Collins, now 43, briefly tried a State Department public affairs job, found it impossible, and now heads the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum. Buzz Aldrin, now 44, suffers from bouts of depression and blames NASA for the Boy Scout fishbowl lives they were forced to live. Armstrong, who'll be 44 next month, is now a professor of aeronautical engineering at the University of Cincinnati. Still his own man, Neil lives within himself and shies away from the press and public.
After we moved to Lebanon, we got to spend more time together. We were able to do the things that maybe we didn't get a chance to do when I was younger.
We spent a lot of time together around golf. He loved golf, and he wasn't a great player, but he loved it.
As I got to know him, our friendship developed. We genuinely enjoyed one another's company, certainly on the golf course, but socially as well. That I think then led me to an ostentatious thought on my part. I wonder if he would be interested in joining my corporate board. Most people I invited, all really, they'd say yes immediately. I spent almost 2 hours with Neil in his office. He wanted to be sure, number one, that I wasn't using him. Also, he wanted to know why I thought he would be a good board member. So answering those two questions to his satisfaction took some time. Neil became a spectacular board member, asked all the hard questions. In fact, I remember one board meeting, he asked a particularly hard question, and I couldn't help it. I said, "Who the hell invited you to get on this board in the first place?" And we all laughed. He said, "You know who did." Not surprisingly, Neil went on several other boards, United and Learjet among them. He was even the founder of a Lloyd's of London insurance business aptly named Apollo. Put that in the can.
Roll program confirmed. Challenger now heading down range. Engines at 65%, 3 engines running normally, 3 good fuel cells, 3 good APUs.
Challenger, go at throttle up.
Challenger, go at throttle up.
Flight Fido, go ahead. RSO reports vehicle exploded. Copy.
Just as things are settling down, President Reagan asked my father to be involved in the investigation committee for the Challenger tragedy. The space program was at risk at that point, and he just didn't feel like he could say no. And that took him right back into workaholic mode.
Neil spent an enormous amount of time on the Challenger accident and was very key in a situation like that.
And I want to pay particular tribute and give credit to Neil Armstrong because he's done a great job. He did so much of the engineering aspects of it.
That was a year of being away from home. And I think that was very difficult for my mother.
I think he just had his priorities, and it depended on where you were on that priority list. And the truth was, I was pretty low.
My father felt like there were things that he just couldn't say no to. And my mother felt like she really wanted him to spend more time with her and with the family.
He said he would change. He'd had 38 years to change. And I just didn't see that would happen.
We attempted counseling and see if we could, help him save it, but, we were way over our heads.
We've been living separate lives for years. I just finally decided to make it final, and I did. And it was the right thing to do, but it was difficult for the boys.
The one thing I regret is that my work required an enormous amount of my time and a lot of travel. I didn't get to spend the amount of time with my family I would have liked.
Ladies and gentlemen, Neil Armstrong, the first to plant his foot on the surface of the moon, has been a pioneer in many ways. And Mr. Armstrong, in asking you to come to the podium, may I say that millions of Americans have admired you not only for your achievement, but for the quiet dignity with which you have conducted yourself and represented not only our country, but humankind. Ladies and gentlemen, Neil Armstrong.
I kind of lost touch with him for some time. But then toward, starting around 2000, somewhere in there, he got more available.
Fellow astronauts, ladies and gentlemen.
He was kind of back amongst us. He had served his time and kind of had gotten a little bit, maybe not so full of pressure.
Wilbur Wright once noted that the only bird that could talk was the parrot, and he didn't fly very well. So I'll be brief.
It was very nice, very pleasant to see Neil enjoying himself. I got a feeling that Neil really felt like he was in the right place at the right time, and he was enjoying what he was doing there.
You want to make a mark. You'd like to leave the world a little better than when you came. That's my goal.
He said he would change, and I think he did, but it wasn't through me that happened. I'm happy that he married Carol. I have, no axe to grind at all. Yeah.
History is a sequence of random events and unpredictable choices, which is why the future is so difficult to foresee.
Open heart surgery, I think, is always a cause for concern. You're not frightened, you're anxious for it to be over with, you know.
Mark called me and he said, "Aunt June, if you're coming, you have to come now. Neil's dying." I was in there with him and I said, "This is your sister." He squeezed my hand. Yeah, he knew. It was a tragic thing. He was a good guy. Yeah.
We have lost an American icon. Neil Armstrong had heart surgery earlier this month, just days after his 82nd birthday. His wife reportedly telling friends he was doing well with his recovery. The passing today of a true American hero carrying that pioneering spirit right into space.
I was honored to be one of the eulogists at his memorial service. Let me read the last paragraph of it, because I can't say it any better. Let me close with this. Neil's historic statement from the surface of the moon said that it was one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind. Well, it may have been a small step, but it was taken by a giant of a man. He was that rarest of men, one who simply did what he believed was right, nothing more, nothing less, every time.
He knew who he was, and he knew what he wanted to do, and he knew how to go after it. And I think he did just that.
Everybody's proud of what he's accomplished. Could I have done that? I'm certain I could have done that. That's who we are.
He was a wonderful representative of the United States, and beyond that, he was a wonderful human being.
I liked his humility. See him on an airplane, you'd never realize this guy was even a pilot.
Obviously, he was a great stick and rudder pilot, and he'll be remembered in aviation and even space circles for that. But it's the more intellectual side of him, and the fact that he was able to mix it all together and produce this beautiful blossom.
Neil was a super guy. He was a class guy. And I loved him.
I am and ever will be a White Sox pocket protector, nerdy engineer. Born under the second law of thermodynamics, steeped in steam tables, in love with free body diagrams, transformed by Laplace, and propelled by compressible flow.
God bless you. Good night from Apollo 11.
I float among the clouds. This old earth can't hold me down, and my troubles, they are far, far below. Up here there are no bombs, and up here there are no crowds, and I'm gonna soar as long as I can go. There's a job to do, I know, responsibility.